All right, it's the top of the hour, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first AUBER webinar for 2020. I am Brian Lewandowski, Director of the Business Research Division at the University of Colorado Boulder. I believe we have a few people who dialed in who are not AUBER members, and for you, AUBER is an association for university business and economic research. It is represented by over 75 universities and affiliate organizations from across the country who conduct applied business and economic research. The applied research performed by these centers includes economic impact studies, labor market analysis, economic and fiscal forecasts, as a few examples. The topic of today's webinar is differential privacy. While Census has used techniques in the past to protect privacy, in the age of supercomputing, privacy advocates argue that the Census needs to do more, hence differential privacy. While data users are wondering what this means for the efficacy of their data in order to do some of the time series analysis and other research that we have been able to do for years. To discuss this, we have with us three experts. Michael Haas, who is the Senior Advisor for Data Access and Privacy at the U.S. Census Bureau. Elizabeth Garner, who's our Colorado State Demographer at the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. And Cindy DeGrone, who is also a demographer at the Colorado Department of Local Affairs. We'll start by hearing a short presentation from Michael, and then we will turn it over to Elizabeth Garner, and after that, we should have some time for Q&A. All of your lines are muted, but you should have a chat screen where you can type in questions, and I'm happy to ask those questions on your behalf. Michael, will you please take it away?
Thank you very much, Brian, and good afternoon to everyone, or good morning if you're not on the East Coast. My name is Michael Haas, and I'm going to be talking to you today about Title 13, Differential Privacy, and the 2020 Decennial Census. So, data stewardship, the protection of the data that we collect from and about Americans is central to the Census Bureau's mission to produce high-quality statistics about the nation's people and economy. We have a strong commitment to protecting the privacy of our respondents and the confidentiality of their data. And this is both a legal obligation under Title 13 of the United States Code, which protects the confidentiality of census data and also imposes strict fines if any of that information is disclosed in identifiable form. But beyond being just a legal obligation for us as an agency, it's also a core and integral component of our institutional culture. We take the protection of confidentiality very seriously. But we can't just consider the privacy threats that we're facing today. When we release data, we can't just be concerned with making sure that nobody can re-identify individuals when we release the data. We also have to ensure that nobody will be able to re-identify individuals next week or next month or next year. And so we have to be able to protect against the privacy threats of today and the privacy threats of tomorrow. The challenge, the difficulty that we face in protecting privacy and confidentiality in our data is that anytime you release any statistic that's calculated off of a confidential data source, no matter how aggregated, no matter how many people are included in that statistic, every time you release a statistic calculated off confidential data, you leak a tiny amount of private information. And if you release too many statistics that are too accurate, eventually you will reveal the entire underlying confidential data source. This is known as the database reconstruction theorem, and we've known that this has been an issue for about 15, 20 years. Now, the Census Bureau has a long history of protecting privacy and confidentiality in our data products, and throughout most of the last 100 years, we have been consistently seeking to improve and innovate with our privacy protections and confidentiality protections. As the number and detail of our data products have increased, and as privacy threats have increased, we have adapted our methods to protect privacy in what we do release. So back in the 1930s, we stopped publishing some of our small area data. By the 1970s, we were suppressing entire tables when the risk was too high. Starting at about 1990, we began using a technique called data swapping, where we would actually swap the records of entire households to introduce uncertainty in the data to help protect privacy. And now with 2020, we are innovating once again, and we are adopting 21st century methods to protect against 21st century threats. But this is just the latest in a long history of innovation. The privacy threat is growing, and it's growing quickly. And the reason for this is that we have more data and faster computers. There have been a proliferation of third-party data sources that can be used and leveraged to attempt to re-identify individuals in published statistics. This includes commercial data, financial transactions, social media, data from data breaches that are available on the dark web, etc. There's a lot of information about you and me out there online, and all of that information can be used to attempt to re-identify us in publicly released statistics. Similarly, computers and the algorithms that are necessary to attempt to re-identify are getting much, much better and much, much faster. So today's computers can perform the large-scale calculations that would be needed to attempt a large-scale re-identification with substantial ease. And so taken together, the fact that there is a lot more data about us available and the computers and algorithms have gotten good enough that they can attempt these re-identifications with these mean that we have an increasing challenge, an increasing difficulty in being able to protect privacy and confidentiality in the data that we release. Remember I said that every statistic you release that's calculated off confidential data leaks a tiny amount of private information. Well, for the 2010 census, we collected a handful of data elements for approximately 309 million people, which gave us about 1.9 billion confidential data points that we needed to protect. But the 2010 census data products released over 150 billion statistics in our various tables and tabulations. So think about that tiny bit of private information leaking with each one of those statistics. Our internal research has confirmed that the Census Bureau's microdata can be accurately reconstructed from just some, not even all, but just some of the public data products that we released in 2010. In fact, our own internal experiments have shown that we were able to accurately reconstruct individual level data from those public data tables for all 6.2 million inhabited blocks, census blocks in the United States. And within those records, we were able to accurately assign block, age in years, sex, race to OMB's 63 race categories, and ethnicity for 71% of the population, if you allow a wiggle room of plus or minus 1 year for age. That's reconstructing records for 219 million people. Comparing those records to commercially available data from 2010 to attempt to reattach names, we were able to have matches to that commercial data for 138 million people. And then comparing those matches to the commercial data back to the confidential census data to see how many we got right, we were able to confirm that we had accurately re-identified 52 million people exclusively using publicly available data. So this was a real eye-opener for the Census Bureau. It showed that the traditional privacy protection methods that we had been relying upon to protect against the privacy threats of yesterday are no longer sufficient to protect against those risks today. So we decided that we had to modernize our approach to privacy protection for the decennial census and for our other data products. And the way that we are modernizing is through the adoption of what's called differential privacy or formal privacy. And what differential privacy is it's a framework that allows you to quantify the precise amount of privacy risk, the precise amount of that private information leakage with every statistic. For all calculations, for all tables, for all data products that you're producing, no matter what external data is available, no matter how powerful the computers are, now or at any point in the future. So it's a mechanism for really quantifying the absolute and relative privacy risk of any data that we are going to be releasing to the public. And quantifying that risk then allows us to inject precisely calibrated amounts of statistically neutral noise to the data to help mitigate that privacy leakage, that privacy risk. And it allows us to precisely calibrate where on kind of this spectrum between perfect privacy and useless data on the one side and perfect data and no privacy on the other, where on that spectrum that we want to be. Because any attempt to protect privacy, any statistical disclosure limitation technique is going to impact the usability of the data. So there's always going to be trade-offs, and differential privacy, this quantification that it enables, allows you to be very specific and very deliberate about where on that spectrum from perfect privacy to perfect accuracy you want to fall. And you do that by establishing what's known as a privacy loss budget. Again, the only way to absolutely eliminate any risk of re-identification would be to never release any usable data at all, and that's not an option. Our primary mission is to produce high-quality statistics. So differential privacy is going to allow us to quantify a precise level of acceptable risk in the data products that we are releasing. And that measure of acceptable risk is known as the privacy budget, or you also see it abbreviated as epsilon. An epsilon of 0 would be the perfect privacy world. An epsilon of infinity would be the perfect accuracy world. And this is a logarithmic scale. And you can allocate that privacy loss budget across all of your calculations, statistics tables, etc. Because each calculation or query or tabulation that you're performing consumes a tiny fraction of that overall privacy loss budget. And the sum of all of those together equals your total privacy loss budget. But because of this complementary construction here, it means that calculations or tables or data products or levels of geography for which high accuracy is critical can get a larger share of the overall privacy loss budget. You can allocate it proportionally to maximize accuracy for the calculations or geographies or tables that you're most interested in. A variety of factors influence the overall accuracy of the data. The number of calculations you're being performed or the number of tables you're releasing. Remember, every calculation or every table uses a fraction of that privacy loss budget. So with a limited budget, the more calculations or tables you're releasing, the less share each one of those gets of that pie. Also, the type of calculation you're performing. Most of the data products that the Census Bureau releases are counts. Those are relatively easy. Some calculations are more difficult under differential privacy and result in greater noise, like means, for example. The size of the underlying population for each calculation or table is going to impact the accuracy. The structure of the algorithm that we're using to implement differential privacy for the 2020 census results in the larger the underlying population, the higher up you aggregate geographically, the more accurate your data are going to be. The range of possible values impacts the accuracy and the amount of noise. Your overall privacy budget, obviously, and the allocation of the privacy budget across your various data products will also impact accuracy. I've heard a lot in the Twitter sphere and in presentations I've given, a lot of people saying, oh, differential privacy is terrible for accuracy of the data. And I want to be very clear and very explicit that comparing differential privacy to traditional disclosure avoidance methods like data swapping, which we used in the past, or self-suppression, from the perspective of accuracy, neither approach, neither DP nor traditional methods are inherently any better or worse than each other at providing accurate data. I've seen implementations of DP that result in very accurate statistics. I've seen implementations of traditional methods that absolutely destroy the underlying data in various ways. It entirely relates to how you implement those methods and the parameters that you select, like your swapping rate or your value of the privacy loss budget, how you go about applying the methods. That impacts accuracy much more than one school of methods over the other. Where the two types of methods do differ substantially is on the privacy front, because differential privacy is able to provide that mathematically provable guarantee that the data are protected in ways that traditional methods cannot. So what are the implications of our adoption of differential privacy for the 2020 census? Well, for starters, I want to be very clear that the switch to differential privacy is not going to change our constitutional mandate to apportion seats for the House of Representatives according to the actual enumeration of state populations. So state total populations will not be receiving any noise. They are not going to be going through differential privacy. The House of Representatives will be apportioned using the actual total state populations as enumerated. As in 2000 and 2010, we are applying privacy protections to the data that we release for the PL 94-171 redistricting data and for all the other data products that we will be releasing. Because of this, and because there's this limited privacy loss budget that has to be allocated across all of the 2020 census products, we are reevaluating both the quantity of the statistics and tabulations that we're going to be releasing and at what level of geographies, because we don't want to expend an unnecessary share of the privacy budget generating and releasing data products that nobody's using, for example. So we're evaluating what tables we're going to be releasing at what levels of geography. And you, our data users, can help us to better help you. Senior policymakers here at the Census Bureau are going to be making a number of very important decisions over the coming year. Those decisions include, what is the overall privacy budget going to be? What is the final suite of data products at what levels of geography that will be released? And how will the privacy budget be allocated across different geographies, across tables, across data products? And in order for those policymakers to make the most informed decisions possible, they need input from data users like yourselves so that they can have the relevant information before they make these final decisions. To assist our data users in evaluating what the impact of differential privacy will be on the 2020 data products, we did release a suite of what we're calling demonstration products using the 2010 census. This is a portion of the overall decennial data products. It included the PL94 redistricting data and selected tables from our demographic and housing characteristics file, which is the successor to what used to be called Standard File 1 back in 2010. Again, there will be more data products than just these. This is just a selection of the data products that we will be releasing in 2020. But we ran these tables using the 2010 confidential data. The result being that you can now see what differential privacy did to the 2010 census data next to how those same data were done using data swapping. And so this allows our data users to assess the impacts of the implementation of our disclosure avoidance system. Just as an FYI, there was a privacy loss budget set for these demonstration data products of 6, allocated to the person records of 4 and 2 for the household records. That may or may not be the privacy loss budget for the actual 2020 census. That decision has not yet been made, but that is an important parameter to know for evaluating these. The demonstration data products are available via this website. They're also available through Cornell University, I believe. And we are soliciting feedback from our users. So take a look at those, compare them, run them through the various types of analyses and models that you use, and tell us where accuracy is good, tell us where accuracy is bad. Because there are a number of issues that we know that need to be improved on. And work to improve the disclosure avoidance system is ongoing. Our statisticians and computer scientists and engineers are working feverishly to make the disclosure avoidance system as good as it can possibly be by the time we start generating the data products for the 2020 census. Some of the issues that we are aware of from our own analyses and from feedback that was received on the demonstration data products and at the December 2019 Committee on National Statistics workshop that we hosted, there are things that we are working on to improve. There are 2 sources of error in the disclosure avoidance system's top-down algorithm. There is the error due to actual differentially private noise That statistically neutral error, that statistically neutral noise that I mentioned before, that is necessary to protect privacy. But there's also another source of error from the post-processing that occurs through the algorithm to make all of the tabulations, all of the calculations, integers, whole people, non-negative, etc., and to be able to put those into kind of a format that people recognize as decennial census data. And what we found through these analyses and through the feedback from our data users at the workshop was that the error resulting from that post-processing is substantially larger than the error that's a result of the differentially private noise to protect privacy. And again, that post-processing error is not unbiased. It actually is resulting in a positive bias for small counts, a negative bias for large counts, and it moves populations around in ways that we did not expect. And so this is something that we are working very hard to improve on. I have a feeling most of your own analyses will find a similar set of biases in the data. But this is something we are aware of. This is something we're improving, and it's something that we will have more information on over the coming months. We have a lot of information about our implementation of differential privacy available on our website. There's a link here to our disclosure avoidance in the 2020 census site. Also, if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to take some today, or you can also reach out to me at the contact information here. And I'll turn things back over to Brian. Thank you so very much for having me today.
Thanks, Michael. That's an excellent summary and overview. Now we're going to turn it over to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, can you go ahead and share your screen? I wonder if Michael needs to unshare. There we go.
Let me know when. Do you see it?
We can see it now. They're all set.
Great. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you, Brian and AUBER, for allowing us to be part of this meeting today. I guess I really want some of my big takeaways for people is one, you know, and Michael really mentioned it as well, is that the Census Bureau wants to learn a lot. And so getting this in front of different users is really important. So I think the AUBER community is a really important community to get this in front of in terms of a data user. It's been in front of different groups, but I don't think it's really been in front of this kind of business research centers. I also want to let you know that there's a lot of entities like ours, whether they're state data centers or state demographer offices across the US that are working on this. So depending on what state you're part of, you know, get involved and get connected with those resources in your own state. At the end of my slide deck, I've got links for that information. So what I would like to do is actually show you some of the implications from that change of the impact of using the differentially private data. Talk a little bit at the very end about those policy decisions that Michael brought up, and provide you again with some more resources, and again how to provide that feedback will be reiterated at the very end. So obviously some of these big impacts are size is a big impact, whether it's a small area, but also I would venture to say not just a small area, but also where there's a large differentiation within, whether it's a county or within a state, creates a huge difference. This consistent urban to rural bias, and then a lot of unreasonable results, which has to do with some of the way that the method is being implemented. So some of the findings across the country that we've seen are household size, less than 1, which doesn't make sense. Families with children, but there's no adult present, which is just not safe. Population with no housing units, occupied housing units with no people, and then areas with 100% occupancy. And for us, we did a lot of the work just at a county level because we saw so many issues at a county level. It didn't make a lot of sense for us to go even smaller than that, but a lot of other communities, states across the state or across the country have reviewed at a tract level. For us, there's also a huge issue because the population is separated from housing units, and that is, or what the concept of an occupied housing unit or occupancy, and that results in a lot of these unreasonable results, but also for us as demographers really creates problems in terms of the data and the information behind it. There's also obviously then issues with geographies that have large group quarter population, because there is this then problem with total population, household population, housing units, and so we saw some big issues with some of our counties with large group quarters. Just for example, this is stealing a slide straight from the state of Alaska in a presentation that they gave. This just shows the impact on average place level percent change between the SF1 and the demonstration product. We can see that Alaska obviously hugely impacted. Again, looking at the place level data, you'll see that Colorado is ranked 7th in that. Well, certainly we're not the 7th smallest state. You can see some small states, Rhode Island, Maine, on the far right side, where that difference in the place level data was a smaller impact than what you'll see is a lot of Western states, where there also is a large differential between some of the incorporated and unincorporated areas. And to highlight that for Colorado, we've done a map for the state. The size of the circles are the relative size of that place. The color has to do with whether there was a gain or a decline. So a gain is a red color, to a decline is a blue color, and then the county color is that unincorporated part of the county that received or lost population due to just this change with the data. If you understand Colorado, know Colorado, you can kind of see, and I'll see if my cursor works on it, the majority of the population lives in the Front Range, about 87% of the total population, and we can see that most of the large cities in the Front Range lost population relative to their unincorporated component of the state. So that has an impact in terms of this distribution of population. Likewise, when we just take a big picture, if we look at the state as a whole and we look at the counties, again, understanding that that Front Range runs from Larimer and Well down to Pueblo, we can see that our Front Range to larger counties are losing population with the implementation anywhere from 0 to 0.5% loss, but then a lot of our counties that are very rural counties, anywhere from a 5 to a 11% gain just in total population across the board, which, remember what I'm saying is that the rural areas are getting more population for the most part. We've got some weird ones like Costilla, which is very rural, that got population. But you can see that impact across the state. You may wonder, okay, what's the big difference? Well, then you think about these implementation of this. So most states will have to go through, all states will have to go through redistricting, not just the reapportionment that Michael talked about, where the state's being held invariant, but then within a state, we end up needing to do the redistricting. This shows the impact of the redistricting, where again, you can see this is looking at our state Senate districts. You can see our state Senate districts on the rural area gaining population, our urban ones losing population. But the problem comes down to then laws and regulations where there's a rule, at least within Colorado, I don't know if it's similar with other states, that the plus minus between state Senate districts needs to be less than 2.5%. Using then the differentially private data that then ranged up to 2.8. For our House districts, the maximum deviation, again, is supposed to be 2.5%. It increased to some up to 3.5%. So certainly this could have a lot of legal implications within states trying to do redistricting, and if they don't trust the data, if they don't think it's true, if it isn't held invariant at certain levels, what kind of confidence can areas have and what kind of legal ramifications are there. We can then look across the entire country. This is just looking at the 116th congressional districts. With that impact, if you know your own state, you understand the rural urban areas. We can see in Colorado there in the center that, again, this impact within our US congressional districts, with the urban areas losing population, the urban area or the rural areas gaining population. Now let's then think about this relationship between population and households. If you remember what I said earlier, our rural areas, so if we look kind of on what you would consider the eastern plains of Colorado, these are the areas that ended up gaining population. But now what we're looking at is that this is a map showing household size. What we're also showing is that a lot of these rural areas are also showing a decline in household size. And you're thinking, wait a minute, I thought they gained population. And there you go. There's the problem. There isn't this consistency held between, the relationship isn't held together between the population and the occupied housing unit. So we've seen that the population increased in those rural counties, yet the household size declined. So what we ended up seeing is that actually an increase in the number of occupied housing units, to the point where many of those counties ended up having zero vacancy. And again, if you know your parts of the state, this would be something to look at, because that just doesn't make any sense across the country and across, for example, especially in Colorado. Within size, there's a huge impact. A lot of for our counties, 22% of our counties are under 5,000 in population. There was an increase in total number of households. So from 16,000 to 24,000, if we aggregated all of those, because one thought has been, well, maybe we can aggregate some of our rural counties together and see if that improves the data quality. We can see that, no, that's not the case, that we've seen an aggregate increase in those total number of households, about 52% higher, and on average, 80% higher by county if you looked at the individual counties. And then, as I had mentioned before, household size declined in a lot of those counties, and most of those counties as well. For counties that are 5,000 to 20,000, so our largest number of counties in Colorado, 38% of our counties, saw the same pattern happen, where we saw an increase in households and a decrease in household size. Similar then for our larger, what we would consider larger, I don't know about you guys, but larger counties, so 20,000 to 60,000, still an increase in the number of households by a smaller number, by that 3%, but 4% on average higher. And again, still a decline in household size because that same pattern happened. And then what you would expect in our counties that are our largest, those of 60,000 or more, a decline in total number of households, and the household size basically was unchanged. Very interesting, when we took this down to the block level, we ended up with 18,000 blocks with more occupied housing units than total number of population, and 11,000 blocks having occupied housing units but zero population. So again, these problems with the separation of population and occupied housing units. We've also seen problems with age, and this gets into the first component of that, where in Colorado we see an aging population, so we would assume that we would see fewer households with children and more households without children. Just when you've got an aging population, that tends to happen. So we did some comparisons between 2000 and 2010 using both the SF, the original summary file data, compared to the DP. When we did that, looking at the original change over time, so this also looks at time series issues, we saw 43 counties decline in our number of households with children, and 20 counties increase, and those that are showing the increase were the ones with our high growth counties, which tend to be counties with children. If we use the DP data, that ended up being only 11 counties declining in our number of counties with children, or family households with children, and 50 counties increasing. Of those, 11 more than 50%, and 7 of those more than 100%. So then even looking at our distribution of families with children, and so looking at age becomes an issue. If we then take a look at all of our different sizes of counties and our different age groups, this is what this chart shows. The blue being counties that are the smallest, less than 5,000, and then our 5,000 to 20, and then our 20,000 to 60,000 are the gray, and then our largest counties, those being yellow. And these are all of the counties showing a greater than 10% difference in the count of in the count by age. And so what we can see is that over 70% of the counties have a greater than 10% impact by the number of 20 and 21-year-olds, as well as 85 plus. And so that distribution of age, which, you know, in our minds, we would love to see that as invariant, is really important. So just thinking about a business community is what matters by age. Certainly looking at consumption patterns by age is really important, but for us, we really look at labor force participation rates by age. And so if you see this disruption in your age distribution, you can see how that can impact some further discussions. For us, one of our other big things that we look at is the distribution of funds based on age. And this was just an example that we had thrown together looking at we've got the area agencies on aging that we provide age estimates for, how this would impact their distribution by region. The regions represent different regions in the state, and you can see that up to a 5% difference in allocation, an increase in allocation based on age, and this is looking at the 60 plus, versus some of our more urban counties or urban regions are at the very bottom of the chart that are impacted negatively by that. And this is just looking at distribution of funds. So again, I want you guys to be thinking about how could this impact the data that you're playing with, because this is the type of feedback that the Census Bureau needs. So I mentioned before the impact by age, and this is really important looking at, for example, birth rates and ages then for birth rates. Something very important for demographers is we look at those birth rates. And so we started looking at a trend in general fertility rates in Colorado, and we saw that 5 counties had changed from an increasing general fertility rate to a decline in the fertility rate, and you can see those fairly large difference. So over time, an increase from 73 to 75, and that's births per thousand, to instead a decline of 64. So the fairly significant decline. Again, primarily are pretty small counties that this is the impact. 3 counties changed from a decreasing general fertility rate to an increase. Again, those changes fairly significant. So instead of a 66 to a 63, it would have ended up showing a change of 66 to 108. Again, fairly small counties that this is impacting, but when we're looking at incidence rates, birth rates, anything that you would, that denominator by age impacts it, this is significant for us. Of the counties where the general fertility rate was computed as a denominator, that changed, those rankings of the top 10, only 5 remained in that top 10 once the DP data set was used. So again, fairly significant impact. So hopefully within this small sample of examples, and again, I would really encourage you to look at the different states and your different resources within each state. We can certainly see impacts for redistricting, financial distribution of based on formula funding, vital stat rates. Certainly this impact of the population to household relationship results in some unrealistic information, but for us, we really lose what we would consider very important information and understanding how households form and that occupancy level, which is critical for understanding data across the decennial time frame, so the intercensal work that we do. Certainly, we can see this huge impact from rural to urban reallocation, or actually from urban to rural reallocation of population, and certainly can impact time series work, which I'm sure a lot of your organizations work at. You know, I think that there's a lot of questions still out there in terms of that level of privacy versus accuracy and what that best balance is. So I think that that is a concern, certainly to include in any information that you submit on behalf of your own area. Certainly looking at the invariance of what level of geography are they gonna, Census Bureau gonna hold invariant and which variables? Certainly for us, really looking at this household to housing unit relationship, the products that they're going to release. And then I think for us, more than anything, is the credibility. I know that there's a big concern on the Census Bureau side on credibility from the security side, the safety side. I would almost flip the coin and say, what about the credibility on the reliability side and on the accuracy side? And once the Census Bureau maybe no longer is seen as that gold standard of accuracy, then what happens to our concept of reliability and data? And then do we have to go to purchasing data? And I worry about, you know, this whole area in the future about how the Census Bureau is seen. The Census Bureau, Michael provided this information already, so this is a duplicate slide, as well as there are some other information here that you can look at, really explaining what is differential privacy. There's a fun YouTube video, as well as where to download the data and other areas that have been playing and using the data. Under other resources, we've put together an interactive map, and we'd be willing to share any of the programming behind it. That's the link to it. Lots of information on IPMs that I would really recommend. It's a great piece. The National Academies of Sciences did a great workshop at the end of December. They've recorded it, and that's available online. And then I had mentioned before that there is a network of other state demographers, and here is the link to that network, as well as state data centers. There's also a network of state data centers, and there's the partner list for that as well. So I don't know how we want to move into the Q&A, but these are certainly some of the questions that we had potentially for Michael. And or for the group as a whole, you know, is to really think about, you know, is there a step to identify where noise should be added? You know, I think before when we were looking at swapping, we only swapped where swapping was needed. Now it seems like there's noise is added everywhere, regardless if noise is needed. So a little bit of a question on that, but you can kind of see those other ones as well. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Brian to maybe facilitate any Q&A.
All right. Thanks, Elizabeth. So Michael, I think we have a few questions for you. Would you like to address some of Elizabeth's that are currently up on the screen, or I can jump in with a few of these other questions?
Sure. So just responding quickly to these. The issue about where noise is added. So noise is added in every tabulation, every calculation under differential privacy, because the idea here is that differential privacy guarantees that everyone's records are protected. So it's not that we're adding noise to some calculations and not to others, with the exception of those things that we are holding invariant. The final list of what will be held invariant for the 2020 census has not been finalized. The data elements that were held invariant for the demonstration products included the state population, state total populations, as I mentioned. It also included the number and type of group quarters facilities at the block level, and the number of housing units at the block level. So those three data elements were held invariant in the 2010 demonstration products. The question of why small areas were adversely impacted, that's an excellent question, and that's the source of the post-processing error that I was mentioning before. That's a result of the implementation of the algorithm, not of differential privacy itself. And the reason for that is we are holding state populations invariant. So total number of people within a state is being held constant. When you have small areas and like with numbers of people at or near zero at a block level, and you are adding noise to that number, because the noise is statistically neutral, you will be subtracting people as often as you are adding them. But if you've got a count that's already at zero or close to zero, subtracting people to make that statistically neutral noise would result in negative numbers. And because you can't have negative people in the tables that we're generating, you have an upward bias for small areas where you're adding people more often than you're subtracting them. Because we're holding the population totals for each state constant, if we're adding people more often than we're subtracting in small areas, those people have to come from somewhere, and they're coming from the larger population, more densely populated areas. That is a post-processing issue, not an issue with the noise itself, and that is something that, yes, it had numerous impacts on all sorts of these calculations, and we are exploring a variety of ways to mitigate that for the later versions of the DAS that will be actually running for the 2020 data product. To your question about longitudinal studies, that is going to depend on the accuracy of the data. We're not going to be re-releasing earlier censuses. I think the thought is that there will be a slight break in the series, but you should be able to compare across censuses. To the extent that we are able, we will be providing kind of information to our data users about how to adapt to the use of differential privacy for time series analysis. And lastly, will additional invariants be considered? For example, occupancy status. That's a policy issue. As I said, our list of invariants for 2020 has not been finalized. Beyond that, I can't speak to that question.
Thanks, Michael. Question for you: the data at the state level. You mentioned that state population will be invariant. Will it be the entire basket of data at the state level, or just state population that you are posting the actuals for?
So for the demonstration data products, it was just total number of people, total number of enumerated people in the state, not the characteristics for those people.
Okay. And is that something that's being considered, whether other attributes are invariant at the state level as well as?
Again, I can't speak to what's being considered for invariance. All I can speak to is what the basket of parameters that were used for the 2010 demonstration products, because that is the most recent version of the implementation.
Okay. So Elizabeth shared some of the concerns with the data set when looking at Colorado, households of less than one, children, no adults, 100% occupancy, and a few others. Using this technique, are you able to hold some relationships constant? So if you held, say, population and households, that if you kept that relationship constant, but still provided or apply DP to, say, population. Is that something that's doable using this technique?
I'm actually not sure I quite understand the question. Can you repeat it, please?
Sure. So let's say you grew population within a county. Could you at least keep that household size if household size was 2.42? Could you certify that, given the changes that you applied to that county, plus 1,000 or minus 1,000, that the household size is still correct for that? I guess what that is really an invariant attribute at that point if you certified that relationship between the two, right?
If, as I said, like, differential privacy requires that all calculations receive noise unless they're being held invariant. So,
okay.
Yeah, I mean, like, there will be no, any calculation will receive noise other than the data points that were being held invariant, which for the demonstration products were the three I already enumerated.
Okay. One question came in early, Michael. I think it was one of your early slides where you were demonstrating how the Census Bureau was able to match records after the fact, basically rebuild the data set down to the individual. Their question is, they're wondering if you're able to do this because you have access to the administrative data and you're using other private data sources, but most people don't have access to those other data sources. Would that reduce some of the privacy concerns? Because we're...
So no, that experiment was done exclusively using publicly available data. So all they did was they took the public data tables that were released in 2010, used a fairly simple though large-scale computing algorithm to solve for the unique set of microdata that could have generated those tables, and then linked those to a commercial data set that was purchased off the shelf, so to speak. So any aspiring computer science undergraduate could have done this if they had access to enough computing power. It did not require any special internal only data for us to perform the experiment. The only thing that we used internal data for was to confirm how many of the re-identifications were actually accurate, essentially gauging how well the re-identification attack performed. But the re-identifications themselves were done using exclusively publicly available data.
Okay, thanks. The last question I have, if anyone else has questions, please type them into the chat. The last question I have is, can you fill us in on the timeline for selecting the epsilon and what that process looks like?
So the first of the 2020 census data products that will be released, other than the apportionment data, which is being released on December 31st of this year, the first of the remaining data products is the redistricting data, the PL94-171 redistricting data, which by law have to be released by April 1st of 2021. So the timeline is still a little bit flexible for feedback and for finalizing decision making, but it is likely that most of these open policy issues will be decided either at the end of this year or very early into 2021, but more likely at the end of this year. We're accepting feedback. Yeah, we're accepting feedback through summer of 2020. Earlier is better because we are working diligently to improve the disclosure avoidance system, and the sooner we get your feedback, that gives us more time to act upon it. But yeah, we will be accepting feedback on the demonstration products through this summer.
And lastly, who is tasked with selecting the epsilon and making some of these privacy decisions within Census Bureau?
Excellent question. So the Census Bureau's senior leadership, which are the senior policymakers within the agency, together sit on a committee. It's called our Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee, or DSEP. And DSEP are the ones who make all of these decisions about what will or will not be held in variance, what privacy loss budget will be selected, how that will be allocated across the levels of geography, how it will be allocated across various data products. They will be making all of those decisions.
Well, thank you both for your presentations today. I think it's been very informative for our audience. Michael, do you have any closing thoughts?
Just hearing from you, our data users, is very important for us. We want the data that we produce for the 2020 census to be as accurate and as fit for use as possible. I think the challenge is there's 1,000,001 different types of uses to which the data can be put. Knowing how you use our data and knowing where accuracy is a priority is very helpful information for us, so that as we seek to improve the algorithm, as we improve the disclosure avoidance system, we can make it as fit for use for you as possible.
Thank you. Elizabeth, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, actually mine I think are very similar to what Michael's are, is please go and play with the data and realize that there is a huge network of folks out there that can help you either with trying to understand or play with it or pull down the data. A lot of people have developed web pages like we have with an interactive map. We got together a group of stakeholders in Colorado, and that's how we engaged with Brian. Hold stakeholder meetings within your own state or within your own community. See how this could impact different areas, whether it's from redistricting to departments of health, to any of the research that you do on the business side. And I think, I would say that we have not seen a lot of applications come out yet looking at that impact from maybe from a business point of view. So I would really highly encourage that type of research, because it's what the Census Bureau doesn't know that's going to be a problem, because they can't work to fix it. It's really identify those big issues so that they can.
Thank you. We do plan to post the 2 slide decks on the AUBER website, and we may even be able to get this webinar reposted on the website, so stay tuned for that. Thank you also to the AUBER community for joining us today, and we'll see you next month.